This video will feature a crazy true story from the site Reddit, which is a popular message board style website containing tons of content across all manner of topics. Lots of the content on Reddit is focused on memes or other lighthearted comedic material, and, for many people, browsing memes is essentially the main purpose of Reddit. However, if you look a little deeper, many subreddits are home to some pretty dark and tense content. Subreddits like RBI, which stands for Reddit Bureau of Investigation, are home to countless true stories that deserve more attention. In this video, we'll take a look at one of those stories. Fair warning, it's pretty intense. Cross-post because I was directed here by True Crime Discussion. Bear with me as I recount this to the best of my ability. I have to remain somewhat vague in some of the details in order to protect my anonymity. However, I will do my best to be as clear as possible about this series of events. Okay, phew. In September of 2015, my dad's girlfriend, Sherry, started an affair with one of his friends, Billy. Billy and my dad had been friends since high school, and I knew him well. He was nerdy and kind of weird, but he was nice enough. My dad, not surprisingly, was pretty upset about the affair, but he and Sherry were already having relationship issues, and I think he was happy to find a reason to leave her officially. I know he had a few relatively cordial run-ins with Sherry and Billy as they all lived in the same town, but he had mostly cut them off entirely. During this time, Sherry moved to a new house only a few streets from my dad. By Thanksgiving of 2015, my dad was roughing it a little. I think he was still kind of bummed about the affair, but he had recently been in a car accident resulting in him losing his job due to a back injury, so additionally, he was having some money issues pending a lawsuit settlement he was waiting on. By December, he was back on the mend and in pretty good spirits. We were very close and spent a lot of time together hanging out or going to bars and concerts. At the beginning of December at 8 a.m., my dad called me at work. We only spoke for about 10 minutes, but he was in a great mood. We had some laughs and made plans to hang out for the weekend. He mentioned very briefly that Sherry had called him about an hour earlier, and he ignored the call. I barely even remember him saying it. I got home from work that night and my phone rang. It was a family friend calling to tell me that my dad was dead, but she didn't have any other details. I was totally shocked. I had no idea what was going on, and I was in instant denial because we just made plans. I had a million things running through my head. Car accident, heart attack, etc. A few moments later, my dad's two brothers and my grandmother knock on my door. It was true, and my dad was dead. However, the biggest shock was that Sherry was also dead. A murder-suicide. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. To add insult to injury, Billy was the one who found the bodies at Sherry's house and was currently being interviewed by police. I took a call from one of the investigators on the scene. He mentioned that it was a cut-and-dry case. 2 adults deceased, each with a gunshot wound to the head. My dad was still clutching the gun. My dad was a hunter, so I was curious about the murder weapon. To my surprise, it was a small-gauge handgun. But it wasn't my dad's, it was Sherry's. Odd, but okay. During this call, and I will never understand why he found these details necessary, but he told me that my dad and Sherry had consensual sex prior to their deaths. He also told me that there was a gap in time between the deaths, that likely my dad had killed Sherry, had instant regret, paced and considered his options, and ultimately decided to kill himself. As I'm listening to this, I just cannot wrap my mind around any of it because it was just so out of character for my dad. And not in a, I don't believe my dad could do something like this kind of way, like a real sincere confusion. First off, he wasn't even that depressed about the affair. They had already been split up for 3 months at this point, and he was seeming pretty happy in the wake of it all. Secondly, as I mentioned before, Sherry was living in a new house. My dad didn't know this house at all, so why or how would he have ended up with her gun in her house? He had his own guns. Thirdly, I knew that she had called him that morning and he ignored her call. It doesn't feel like someone desperate to kill another person would pass up an opportunity for an interaction with that person. None of it made sense. But I had to come to terms with the information I was given and trust that the police department knew what they were doing. Not to mention, I had a funeral to plan and some deep grieving to do. A few days later, I made the trip over to my dad's house to collect his belongings and settle his affairs. His house was shockingly fully on, like lights on, TV on, cat not fed, morning coffee and weed still on the table, back door unlocked, etc. It was like he raced out the door really quick with full intentions on being right back. This was not the home of someone who left with the intention of never returning. I know mental illness can and will do strange things to some people, but if nothing else, he would have never let his cat go hungry. Yet another red flag in my mind, but I continued forth. Eventually, I was given some of his belongings from the scene of the crime by police, and my boyfriend decided to go through his phone to see if there were any signs of what might have occurred. We found that after I spoke with him, he did end up answering a call from Sherry, which was around 11 seconds long, but we also found a slew of really weird text messages. None of the texts appeared to have been from my dad because 1, he had terrible grammar, and 2, he didn't even know how to text. I never received a text from my dad my entire life. He had a flip phone with T9 in 2015, for God's sake. So many people reached out to me saying, "This doesn't feel right," and I agreed. I didn't feel like any of it felt right, but I had nothing of any real substance other than gut instinct to guide me, which is not enough when dealing with police or investigators. At one point, I literally had to ask people to just stop telling me that they thought this was somehow a setup, because I couldn't do anything about it and I was starting to lose sleep over it. I was scared to death of turning into one of those people who obsess over something out of sheer denial. No one was going to take my plight seriously, and I already knew that I would be overlooked and disregarded. So for the past 5 years, I have done nothing but stress and silence, until now. This past Friday, I took a call from someone very close to my dad's friend group urging me to push harder into reopening my dad's case. Recently, it has come to light that Billy is apparently a master con artist and a fraud. I guess Sherry is one of 3 girlfriends that Billy has found dead since 2010. This is where I need your help, Reddit. Here is the information I was given. At some point prior to my dad and Sherry's death, Billy was dating a woman who had recently come into money. Shortly after, this woman was found dead at the bottom of her stairs. Around the time that Billy started his affair with Sherry, she had recently inherited between $500 and $800K from her father passing away. Billy's current girlfriend has had organ failure since last year. She recently inherited a large sum of money, and Billy found her dead last Tuesday. Now, I know she was already sick, but the rumor is that she pleaded for medical help for days, and I guess he basically just let her suffer. I also found out that Billy took photos of my dad and Sherry's bodies before he bothered to call the police. Why? He later showed these photos to his young sister. Double why. He has also told the story of how he found their bodies numerous times to the same person, yet the story has been told in 3 different ways. Did he take the photos as some sick trophy, or did he take the photos to be able to maintain his narrative? Upon learning this information, I kept thinking, but why would he have to kill my dad in order to steal Sherry's money? And then it finally dawned on me today that it was so my dad could be the scapegoat. He had to use my dad to portray a crime of passion scene so he could pretend to be a victim in the whole thing. Even though he was interviewed by police, it was just an interview, not an interrogation. The investigator said it was a cut and dry scene. They would have had no motive to interrogate him because as far as they could tell, the murderer was dead already. However, I do know that there was about an hour in his timeline that day that went unaccounted for. Billy has a relatively high IQ. I don't think he could have been strong enough to fight my dad in hand-to-hand combat, but I very much believe he could have easily outsmarted him. My current conspiracy theory is that Billy went to Sherry's house that morning before work, had consensual sex with her, killed her, then used her phone to call my dad, which was the 7 a.m. call. My dad didn't answer the call, and Billy went to work to maintain his story. I think Billy then used his lunch break, the unaccounted for hour and also almost identical to the time of my dad's death, to go back to Sherry's house where he used her phone to call my dad again. This is the 11-second call that my dad did answer that caused him to race over to Sherry's house, leaving his house in the state I found it 2 days later. I think he tricked my dad into coming to Sherry's where he would be caught off guard and out of his element for an attack. I also think this could be where the gap in their deaths could be. I think Billy went back to work for the rest of the day and then found my dad and Sherry, where he took the photos and then called the police. Here's my problem. I have no idea what to do. I don't know how to reopen a closed case. I don't have any direction on who to speak with. I have tried the police department who handled my dad's case, the local FBI, and the state attorney general, and no one can even tell me who could help me with this. Do I need a private investigator? Do I need an attorney? Is this worth looking into at all? I would love to clear my dad's name and take this terrible weight off my family's shoulders once and for all. I am also fully prepared to accept that I could be wrong, but now I have to know. Any help is greatly appreciated. So, needless to say, that was a pretty crazy story. Considering all the details OP included, plus all of the updates she posted in the comments and additional posts after this original post was submitted, it's pretty clear that OP is telling the truth, and her story is genuine. I can't imagine the anxiety of your close relative being posthumously accused of such a heinous crime and knowing that they're innocent, but being unable to force the police to reopen the case. I've checked OP's profile and, unfortunately, there was no final resolution to this story. In some of the last updates posted by OP, the latest news is that Billy has disappeared, potentially on the run since he may have caught wind that OP knows the truth, and that OP is in the midst of coordinating with lawyers and investigative journalists to get this case officially re-examined. I can't blame OP entirely for not posting any more updates, as I can imagine that Reddit is probably the last thing on her mind in this situation. Regardless, I hope that Billy was eventually found and held accountable for his crimes. Also, some of the comments to OP's posts are worth taking a look at. Something that sticks out to me is most suicides by gun will not be holding the gun after. The body goes limp and gravity goes to work. It is rare the gun is in their hands after. OP replied, "Correct, and that was the constant discrepancy in his numerous tales of the story. In one instance he made no mention of the gun at all. In another instance he mentioned that the gun was on the ground next to my dad who was lying on the couch. In a third instance he mentioned that the gun was on the ground and my dad was sitting upright. So I'm not sure how a crime scene with two dead bodies can change that much without being altered, but I think it's definitely interesting." There were tons of additional comments on this post that are worth taking a look at, but I obviously can't show them all here. Regardless, it seems like the more everyone digs into the details of this story, the more obvious it becomes that OP's dad is innocent, and Billy is clearly guilty. This is one of those situations where I wish the local, small-town police force weren't in charge of investigating this crime. If a statewide investigative agency had been the ones to examine the initial crime scene, I'd be willing to bet it wouldn't have been written off as a murder-suicide so hastily without digging into the details a bit more. For instance, OP's dad wasn't even tested for gunshot residue to determine whether he really fired the gun. There are just lots of details that don't add up here, but convincing the police to reopen this case is likely futile without generating tons of media attention to pressure the police into getting off their asses and re-examining this case without making the blinding initial assumption that this was a straightforward murder-suicide. Anyway, that's all I've got for now regarding this particular case. It's been 8 months since OP posted an update, so I think it's unlikely that we'll hear anything new on the matter, but I'll check back occasionally and post an update in the comments of this video if anything significant comes up. Regardless, I've got a few more equally crazy Reddit stories to take a look at in the future, so feel free to subscribe to my channel and check those out when they're uploaded. Anyway, thanks for watching.